What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Racially Speaking, where we have real and honest conversations about race as it's viewed through the lens of faith, family, and vocation. As always, I'm your regular host, David Phipps. And joining me once again, I think it's 3 times in a row, John Mark, my prodigal co-host, aka Mr. Two Chains, aka the social justice cowboy, Mr. Wyatt John Mark Walker. What's going on, man?
Not much. How you doing, David?
I'm doing great. So, all right, look, I want to honor our guest's time. We have a very special guest today. As if you're listening, you already know, but I want to take advantage of every minute he's giving us. So we're not going to do quite as many pleasantries, but here's one correction, John Mark, that I need to correct from last episode. So if you remember, and if you've listened, listeners, to the past episode, we talked a little bit about the endurance sports. We talked a little bit about swimming. John Mark, you're an avid swimmer. Previous swim team membership.
Yeah, in junior high.
Yeah, anyway, I mentioned my wife, Caitlin, had just recently gone back to her roots swim team days and went to the pool. My kids are very into swimming nowadays. And I mentioned, let me think how I said it. I said that she had gone to the pool and come back home a little bit frustrated because she was getting back into it a little out of shape, or felt like she was out of shape. And she was upset that she had not been able to swim her 30 laps she remembers swimming in high school or middle school, right? So I was noticeably just like 30 laps. I couldn't do that if you dangled $1 million in front of me the whole way. So come home, she a couple days later listened to the episode and she said, "Look, don't say anything, but I want you to know I was winded because I did do the 30 laps. It's not that I couldn't do it." I was like, "Oh, okay." She's gonna be really upset that I corrected, because just everyone knows she did not want me to correct anybody. She just wanted me to know.
I mean, like you're really risking it all early in the podcast by just telling all your wife's business.
No, I mean, but
2 episodes in a row.
That's on you, man. That's on you.
I did 2 episodes in a row. 2 episodes in a row.
That is 2 in a row. But I was like, I had to give her credit. I mean, she's gonna be upset, but
that's impressive. It's impressive.
I'm praying for you, man. I'm praying for you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. All right. Well, that's all the pleasantries I want to get to. You already heard his voice. We are joined by, let's see, how should I introduce you? By author, speaker, pastor or priest? Is it pastor or priest?
Former teacher. That's what I need to hear from you.
Former. I was gonna get there. Former. You keep stealing my thunder. Former teacher, theologian, professor, author, speaker, writer,
doctor,
all these titles, doctor, PhD, Mr. Esau McCaulley, aka my former 10th grade history teacher to my days in Norfolk, Virginia. Mr. McCaulley is what I know you as. Should I just call you? I'm going to call you Mr. McCaulley for now.
I mean,
unless you make me not.
Nobody in the world still calls you that, you know. my students here call me Dr. McCaulley. My kids call me. Nobody calls me Mr. McCaulley except for about 100 students who taught from like 09 to whatever. You do whatever helps you feel relaxed. I think Mr. McCaulley is a little bit too much.
Okay. Esau feels like too much, but I'm gonna give it a try.
Okay, you hear him stuttering when he says he can't get it. Let's do Dr. McCaulley, make your life easier. How about that?
Dr. McCaulley, that's perfect.
Dr. McCaulley.
All right, well, so you've kind of, again, I said I should have hit record right when you jumped on, because that was gold. But anyway, in all seriousness, how much do you remember of me as your student? My question was going to be, do you remember me at all? But you do, which I'm honored. What kind of student? I genuinely want to remember, because I'm like, I remember some shenanigans.
Yeah, like I'm not gonna lie to you. When I got the email, I get emails with a list of people who are requesting stuff for me to do, and my assistant goes through the list. Then they said David Phipps. I was like, what does David Phipps want? They say he wants you to do his podcast, Racially Speaking.
Oh my gosh!
What? I'm in. Like I said I was in, because anytime you have a student who is out in the world doing well, that always makes me happy. And so as a student, I mean, a lot of people who are in high school are trying to find themselves. And they're trying on different identities to try to figure out which one works. They're trying to think through issues of their faith. And so I always consider all of my students unfinished projects. And even when the student feels finished, they feel like, oh, they know exactly who they are. There's the possibility of people making radical changes after they graduate. And so I would say you were a somewhat, I mean, I wouldn't consider you the most serious kid, but you were a kid with a pretty decent head on soldiers who was shoulders who were up for the occasional shenanigan. It's probably an accurate depiction.
Okay. Hey, that was a fantastic description. I really did not know what you're going to say, because I can think back to, some stuff, small Christian private school.
Yeah.
Just, it's a different type of atmosphere if you've never been in one.
Sometimes you have to find yourself in rebellion. One of the things that you learn is life is just really, really long. And so sometimes students, not you, David, students hide their insecurity in cynicism and sarcasm.
Oh yeah, completely secure in high school.
It's one of the ways in which students, they don't, like, vulnerability is a hard thing to it's like one of the hardest things to do is to be vulnerable. And so I have a teenager right now, and I just say to him, like, just don't hide behind your cynicism or your sarcasm. And so it's really, really difficult to know what's actually going on in the life of the student. So you treat all of them like they're in the process of becoming. And in the process of that becoming, sometimes they frustrate you, but you love them anyway.
How long did you continue to teach? Because I graduated in 2007. I don't even remember how long you were there.
I was only there for 3 years. So I think I was there from 2007, no, 2009. I was there from like 2007 or 2006 to 2009. I was only there for 3 years.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, I couldn't remember. I knew
my wife was in the military, so we got stationed in Japan.
Right. Okay. That's right.
We were stationed in Norfolk, for those of you who are locals. There's a Navy base in Norfolk, in Portsmouth, Virginia. So we're stationed there. And then after that, we got relocated to Okinawa, Japan, and we went there afterwards.
Wow. Great. Yeah, awesome. Okay.
John Mark, you want to tell you what you were like in high school too, or no?
Yeah. You just guess. Just read me right now.
Yeah. That was a phenomenal diagnosis. Is that the right word? That was a great assessment. Loved it.
Yeah.
All right. You mentioned vulnerability. So, I was telling John Mark, I don't want to necessarily repeat all the book promo you're doing. I've listened to just a couple, not, all your interviews, because I wanted to kind of do our own thing here. But the backdrop of your most recent book, How Far the Promised Land, that just came out, John Mark and I are just fresh off finishing it. It's right up the alley of where we go with conversations on here. So there's going to be some overlap. So first, and also I'm talking about myself mainly, are like the kings of long-winded questions. So I know you're here for it though, Dr. McCaulley. So first, How Far the Promised Land, let's just start there. I think it's going to open up some things. What made you want to write that book? I know you've been asked that 1,000 times by now.
No, I think one of the things that happens is sometimes I was thinking about this morning when I was walking. I had done some prayer this morning, and actually I had gone on a run. I was running, so I was actually running, and I had this idea because there's certain things that was kind of frustrating me about some stuff that I wanted to do, and I felt like the Holy Spirit. Can I be that blunt to you? Say like you have to stop waiting for other people to do what God has called you to do. And I was like, and so this is really unrelated to like the book, but I think that's part of what the book was like. There's tons of times as an African American, you feel like you're just not represented or seen, if it's in movies, if it's in books, if it's in television, and you say, man, I wish there was a story that actually articulated my own experience. Or I wish that when I was coming up and I was trying to make sense of what it meant to be Black and Christian and deal with racism and love Jesus, like how did all of those things come together? And there wasn't a book to help me with that kind of process. And so for me, How Far to the Promised Land was my way of saying like my particular stories, or the stories that center Black protagonists and Black families, are important and should exist in the world. And when I sat down to write it, it was my story, but I wrote the book that I wanted to exist in the world. So that other young Black boys and girls and anybody who is concerned with learning more about race and injustice and faith in America might have a resource. And so part of what it means to be a public theologian or a writer is to kind of give yourself away, hopefully for the good of the world. And so How Far to the Promised Land was one way of me giving myself away for the good of the culture, hopefully.
Wow, it's powerful.
I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head if that was your goal, because I felt it as I was finishing of just that. That's literally what I felt like. He's sacrificing, but he's by giving himself away because of the bigger picture. It's going to be so helpful to, I think, anybody reading it.
Yeah.
I don't want to give too much away about a lot of these questions are just themes that I picked up on that I'd love for you, if you're willing to elaborate on. So it's essentially, it's your story. It's a memoir of your story and your upbringing. One thing I picked up on, I wrote these kind of throughout as I was reading it, but and it was present throughout, but is just your family, but then the Black family. So I feel like you hit on a lot of, it's your story, but you innately hit on a lot of stereotypes. I think that you shed a lot of just beautiful insight and light on. So one thing, sorry, again, I said it was long-winded. So I picked up on attacking anyone and everything, in my observation, that seems to have anything to, I'd say, like nuanced to say about the classic makeup of the nuclear family. I think it seems to be a common way to explain away systemic racism. I think like an example is like the Larry Elders, the Tim Scotts, the stereotypes like welfare queens. Like, what do you say about that?
So let me probably put a little bit of context. I'm assuming most of you haven't read the book. So in 2017, my father passed away in a single car accident. And he was a truck driver and he died in California, and most of my family was still in the South. And after a quick conversation with my family, it became clear they wanted me to do the eulogy. And I don't know how many people here have actually heard eulogies. Probably a few people have actually done them. One of the things that you do in the eulogy is you have to sit down with the family and the friends to tell me about the person who's passed away. And since my father been in and out of my life as a child, he struggled with drugs and alcohol. He wasn't a huge part of my life. And so I had to sit down with my family to kind of learn about who he was. But what began as a search into his life actually ended up, because I know a lot about my family history because I didn't know my father. You can see how those things would be connected. And what began as a look into him really expanded out to become an analysis of my family over generations. And what began as an exploration of one Black life expanded out into the story of many Black lives over the course of the generations. My family searching for the promised land, searching for this place where they might feel at home. There's this verse in the Bible in, I think it's Malachi, where it says they sat under their own vine and fig tree, and there was no one to make them afraid. And so the promised land then refers to this place where Black people can feel safe and whole and respected. And so rather than just reflecting on a story about one man's journey for that, it became about my family's journey and how those successive generations had an impact on me. And so one of the things that you can say is that if you look at that story really simply, if you just look at the characters in that story, my father who's an addict, my mother who's a single mom, African Americans, my grandparents and great grandparents who suffered under Jim Crow and were exploited by landowners. These are the kind of stories that we might think that we know. What I want to say is that those stories are more complicated than the summaries that we often hear of in the media, because we hear these summaries and these stories that allow us to kind of dismiss people. And you're right that what I wanted to tell was a complicated story, because I think you often get kind of two kinds of books. One book says, all of these things that happen to us are a result of systemic factors beyond our control. That's why these things happen. And you see some of the racist events and misdeeds, you say, oh, that's how the system is playing itself out. Well, there's another group of people who you're talking about, who are the personal responsibility crowd, that all the problems that face people are a result of individual poor choices. And I want to say that in reality, things are more complicated than that. It's not simply all poor choices, though poor choices have an impact. It's not all society, although society has an impact, that every human life is a complicated kind of intersection of those things.
Is that like, do you feel like you're able to engage with even what you just articulated, like on an everyday conversation, now that you've put this book out there, like even beyond like a book interview, you know what I mean?
I think that this book reflects what I've come to see. And that's what I was talking about when I said the stories that you want to see in the world. Like I've always thought that it was this way. One of the things that happens is that you can look from the outside of poor communities and be paternalistic and say, oh, all of the people in this poor community are so because society's done them wrong. And society has done a lot of poor people wrong. But I was actually with poor people, and we can be mean, right? Poor people are capable of sin. And so when the problem is that money gives you a buffer to kind of deal with some of the ramifications of your sin or your misdeeds. Money can kind of help you get by when you make a mistake, you lose your job, you lose your temper, you have connections, these things happen. But when you're poor, there's no buffer between any bad decision that you make in catastrophe. And so trying to articulate that possibility that, but not only are the poor capable of sin, they're also capable of real, genuine acts of beauty, heroism, and holiness. And so we also tend to only value people who are materially successful. Those are the lives that we want to see. And when I want to say, well, hold on, poor people, even if they remain poor, can have lives that are instructive and beautiful in their own right. And so I've just learned to think of the world that way. And what you see in the book is a reflection of my own hard-won understanding of my story.
Wow.
Yeah. John Mark, you have something you want to chime in on?
It's just encouraging to hear you say all that. And I appreciate that you shared your book so personally. You shared your family with all of us. And I think it's profound. So don't have much to add. Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can jump to the next question. I want to hear her talk more.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you're so thorough in these answers that you're kind of answering several at the same time, but I'm going to ask this next one. But so we obviously, on this podcast, the nature of it, we care about how to engage personally, but then, I hope it's helpful to our listeners. So that's a lot of these questions are geared towards, I think, shedding light on different sides of conversations. So how do you engage today with sentiments like BLM, the organization, or even just the the hashtag, or Jamar Tisby's, his whole thing is justice takes sides, compared with, like, in the Bible, Jesus flipping the tables in the temple, Jesus but also telling us, like in Matthew 5, to turn the other cheek, stuff like that. I'm thinking of Dr. King's, that we would judge others based only on the content of our character, the multi-ethnic church, hot button things like defunding police. Like how do you engage with this stuff? Because I feel like the nature
That was
of
like 7 questions. I don't know if
I know,
answer.
but here's where I'm going.
Like 15
book,
topics.
I feel like you combine a lot of stuff by just talking about forgiveness and truth at the same time. Like how do you engage with those as they combine?
I think the real question is that I'm going to tell you this story that may seem to be unrelated. I had a friend of mine, this is when I was in college, who was like considering becoming a Christian. And we had like a long conversation over the course of I was not evangelizing this dude. He came to me, right? And he asked about, these questions about Christian faith. And so at about 11:30, 12 o'clock, we're still having these questions. And I was like, hey man, this has been great, but I got class in the morning. Like, do you want to be a Christian, or like, can I go to sleep? And he said, well, if I become a Christian, what will this mean about like my social life and these, 2 or 3 other girls that I know? I said, bro, that was the real question. Like, what you've been doing all of these 5 or 6 other hours was like a waste of my time. What you really wanted to know was, could you still like lie and cheat and manipulate people? And I was like, well, sometimes what is the actual question is hiding off screen, right? And what I try to discern, in other words, is the actual issue like these things. So for example, someone says, well, I don't support the Black Lives Matter organization. Well, like, I don't donate to them. I've never spoken at I've never spoken at one of their events. And so in other words, the amount of conversation that an organization gets versus the issue itself, and why is it necessary for like, if Black people are subject to injustice, why do we have to start with asking the ethnic minority to explain all of these things before they can get some support, right?
Yeah.
So
That's
like,
good.
if you see a Samaritan lying on the side of the road, like how many questions do you ask before you help the Samaritan?
Mm.
And
That's a good
so,
question.
and if you really have to get those questions answered, I really want to know. And so, in other words, there's tons of questions that are important to ask, that relate to the proper ways to pursue justice in America. Things that are healthy and things that are unhealthy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I find that if I spend the first 45 minutes of a conversation explaining away all of your misconceptions and proving that I'm not something that you despise or distrust, then you really don't want to help anyway. And
Mm.
so I've
Yeah.
rarely found that those conversations are fruitful, because it just, one of the things that happens, and this is what I want you to understand,
Yeah.
is that what, and this is kind of a common event that I see. People just kind of peruse the internet, or they listen to like certain places and talk radio, and they get the kind of wildest ideas about racial justice that they can find. And they kind of go, oh, I heard this somewhere, I heard this part, I heard these people, I heard this. And then they bring all of those to you whenever you talk about, say, well, what about these 15 things? Like, well, I've never said those things. So it's not my job to explain them away. And so I think that the first question that I always ask myself, is this a good faith interlocutor? And if they're not a good faith interlocutor, then it's actually not very fruitful. Now, sometimes I might engage in a conversation for the benefit of the person who's listening in on the conversation. But I lose a lot of confidence that the person who's kind of, you can tell the kinds of media someone is consumed by the questions that they ask and the fears that they have. And so
That's well said.
It's really hard when someone is consumed that much fear-based media for them to see the person in front of them. In other words, I'm not the Black person that you've invented in your head based upon the media that you consumed. I'm the Black person who's in front of you. And getting people to see me, one of the funny things about this, I know I'm talking too much about it. One of the funny things about it is when people will confidently say what you believe and be actually wrong. Like, I've seen people say stuff about me. It's like, it's not,
I'm sure you have.
not true. And I used to tell them that's not true. But then they would say that I was lying. I said, wait a minute, I'm me. I'm actually me.
Right.
And so you have to learn. One of the things, I was reading John the other day, and Jesus said, the world is going to hate you because they hate me. Right. And he said in another place, I think it's in Matthew, like they what they said about the master, just imagine what they're going to say about the students. And my goal is to have, if someone's going to hate me, let it be for me trying to be like Jesus and not being a jerk. So like, in other words, I try to live with integrity, not so that I'm well liked or accepted, but that so that if someone is offended by what I've said or done, as best as I can do it, and nobody does this perfectly, they're offended by the ways in which my faith is, and my love for God and His Word has led me to a certain direction. And so it's rare. It's almost like the amount of times someone has, in good faith, criticized something that I've done with an accurate description of what I actually believe is less than 1%. Most of it is just like a combination of words like woke and whatever, communist, Marxist. But it's rare that those things are real. And I just don't know how you convince somebody who's determined in some cases not to listen. But if they want to listen, then we can have tons of good-based conversations. And I won't always be right because I don't have everything correct. There's a possibility we might learn from one another.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So, but just hearing you talk about Jesus, I'm like, this is the author of Reading While Black. So it's coming through. Who you are is coming through in your writing and everything. So I just have this is a side question, David. You can
I'm the
take
same
it back
person,
from here.
man. It's the same person.
You are. Your 3 books, right? Talking about pushback and receiving things. 3 of your books. So, How Far to the Promised Land, and then you wrote Lent, and then Reading While Black. So
Yeah.
comparing the Reading While Black and this one, what's been the response like, especially like the pushback? What has been? How have you been received with those two?
Well, I think that when you are first introduced to an audience, like now people know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Reading While Black was an interesting experience because it was more unexpected. And like, no, I wasn't like, like some big, I'm not a big public figure now, but at the time I definitely wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was more like an out the trunk, so this like back in the day, sorry,
Out the
y'all too
trunk.
young for this, but you used to pop back in the day when you used to get haircuts and stuff, you go to the barbershop, somebody would pop the trunk, they'd have like CDs,
Yeah.
they had everything. You need
Yeah.
t-shirts. To pop the trunk just means like, get it out the mud. So in
Yeah.
some sense, Reading While Black was a pop the trunk kind of book. And I think that people who understood what I was doing, that was trying to say there's a way of being Black and Christian that combines a love for God's word, the reality of the need to be saved from like our sins, and a belief in structural racism. It's just ordinary Christianity in a lot of Black spaces. This isn't controversial. It's just like it has been ignored. And so the South got something to say. And so I think that for people for whom any discussion of race meant liberalism, or any discussion of race meant like you were a bad Christian or you were divisive. For those people who didn't even take the time to read it, the very title Reading While Black kind of triggers some people.
Yeah.
It does.
And so that was just the reality. And it was a little bit disorienting because you're just not, if you've never actually like been lied on publicly, it's like a really disorienting like kind of feeling. Because normally when you live like a regular life, like it's the person down the road who's lying about you. You can just go to the three people and say, this person isn't telling the truth. Or they can come to you and there's a possibility of a conversation. But when there's kind of like a wider, like it's almost like you lose control of the narrative that surrounds you sometimes. And that part can become a little bit disorienting. And you just have to know, that like God sees what you're doing. I would say How Far to the Promised Land is a little bit different because it is a more reflective book, and it is much more looking at family, poverty, and racism and faith. So it's a little bit of a different kind of book. So I don't think I've gotten the same pushback. There's some people for whom I put this joke on the social media this morning. It was like, if you gave a 1-star review of How Far to the Promised Land, you're a hater. Because like someone did, I was like, you don't gotta like my book, but 1 star, right? And I was like, you're just a hater.
That's
and like
ridiculous.
there's certain people, people don't know this. Like there's the reality that when you're a minority writer, you're often vulnerable because if the wrong crowd sees it and they don't like it, they have this thing called review bombing. They kind of take down like the and so as an African American writer, you're always vulnerable to like the whims of the market. But I've been blessed so far to have it been received really well, and people really enjoy it. And so it's been a lot, but it's also at this point, I've been in the public square writing for like 3 or 4 years. And so if you come to the book now, I think you have a little bit better idea what to expect. Even though I think and hope that this book is a lot different than Reading While Black. And that people will be surprised by what they find. Did you think it was different?
Yeah, I think it was different. I mean, just because it's your story, I think it was different, but still very much.
Yeah, so it was different because one of them is mostly exegesis,
right,
and biblical interpretation. The other one is largely a narrative, and so they're really different books. And so I think that might also account for the different reception.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I don't know if I made this up. Did you say that you like kind of closed, no pun intended, but closed the book on Reading While Black, and then at that sort of moment you realized you kind of needed to write How Far to the Promised Land?
They're related. The books are more related than people actually give it credit for. I started writing How Far. I started writing Reading While Black. So this is kind of like timeline, like almost like the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
So
That's right up John Mark's alley.
the dedication to Reading While Black says, this book is written in memory of my father, Esau McCaulley Sr., who died before we got to see our name in print. Whatever else I am, I'll always remain your son. And anyone who saw that book for the next 3 years thought, oh man, he must have had such a positive relationship with his dad. This is so sweet. You know, this is this great thing. And I knew that that wasn't true. But the reason I wrote that part is because I had done the eulogy for his funeral.
Wow.
To begin around the time the Reading My Black was being written.
Yeah.
And so the events of How Far to the Promised Land that began in 2017 with my father dying was around the time I was writing Reading While Black. That makes any sense?
It does.
Like chronologically in my life, I wrote Reading While Black in Rochester, New York. My father died when we lived in Rochester, New York.
Wow.
And so in the events of How Far to the Promised Land, it's basically everything in my life up to the beginning of writing Reading While Black.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So you're going to add an appendix about writing Reading While Black and experiencing that?
No, I don't.
Is that coming next?
You know, believe it or not, there's one more. There's a book hiding in all of that, but I'm not going to tell you about the next one that's coming. I'm not going to break news on the podcast, but there's more.
No, that's fair.
More to come.
That's fair. I'm glad to hear that. That's good.
I'm going to dip back into my biblical studies bag. I'm not done yet.
Oh, nice. Okay. All right.
I hope you're not done for a long time.
Yeah, me too.
Towards the end, you said, this is a quote, hope I don't butcher it. We don't know who we are until we have to decide in life and death situations. That sound right?
Yeah.
Do you think that's obviously that's your personal quote, but do you think that is true of
yes, it's universally true.
Universally
Every
true.
single human being.
Okay. Do you feel like it's even more true right now based on the types of conversations we're having?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So
yeah,
one of the things that I think that people are learning in this moment is that we thought there was a racial consensus in America. We thought there was one.
Yeah.
And we thought we all kind of agreed that racism was bad. And we ought to do what we can to kind of fight and push back against it. And a lot of people in the church just say, oh, because of like what God says about what a person is, therefore, when incidents come, we're going to be in a certain place. And I think that what's happened is that we realized that we didn't have that consensus.
Yeah.
And that a lot of people who we respected had disappointed us. That's a song by Sam Cooke. Y'all know Sam, y'all not old enough for Sam Cooke, but he has a song called
We know Sam, we know.
I know, I'm messing with you. He has a song called A Change Gonna Come.
Yep.
Yeah. I won't sing it, but he's like, I was born by a river in a little tent, and just like that river I've been running ever since.
Yeah.
Then that's the killer line that's to open. But the second stanza, it says that if I fall on my knees and I say, brother, help me please. Right. When he falls down, he says, you know, and they wind up, I fall, and he said, and they wind up knocking me back down on my knees. So he falls and he says, brother, will you help me please? So they wind up knocking me back down on my knees. In other words, in the moment when I actually thought I was going to get some help, I got knocked down by the very people that I turned to. And I think that in the moment from 2020 on, where a lot of Black Christians, or just Black people in general, was saying, society's knocking us down, will you help? And some people said, I can't help because that will make me woke or something. Or I can't help because that will make me a critical race theorist. So I can't help because that makes me a Marxist. Or before I help, can you fill out this 15-page theological form to make sure that we agree on every single dot and jittle before we can help?
Yeah.
And trust, I teach Bible. Theology is super important to me. I'm not dismissing it. I'm saying that the moment revealed where empathy was. And and for the people who this is the crazy part. For the people who stayed the same, we all of a sudden found ourselves as radicals. Because I think the culture shifted hard to the right and hard to the left. And for the people who didn't immediately jump into those comfortable ideological buckets, we found ourselves being seen as being suspicious by a bunch of people. So I do think that life, but I think that's on a national level. I think that you don't know what you believe until your beliefs start to stop materially benefiting you.
Yeah.
When they get in the way of your career, when they get in the way of your social standing, or when the fruits of it aren't immediately apparent. We all have to suffer.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying God will suffer for us to grow in our faith. I'm saying the life hurts us. And how we respond to those wounds sometimes reveal our deepest values. And so one of the reasons, sorry to go back to the book, is that I talk about hard things that happen to me and people in my family, not because I want us to see like that we are heroic in some way, but that people can get this misconception. There's that line that people say, I don't look like what I've been through. I don't look like what I've been through. They say that a lot in the Black church. And people can say, oh, this person is Christian because Christianity just works for them. That they've kind of had it easy. That you're right. You have this job. You have this family. And I want to say, no. I was pressed. And when I was pressed, I discovered who I really was and what I really believed. And just because now I'm on the other side of that pressing, it doesn't mean that pressing wasn't defining and clarifying as to who I was and what I am. And so I think that all of us will be tested. And you might be tested by success, right? You might get everything that you ever wanted, and you will find out it's not sufficient to bring you joy. Ask a million celebrities, right? You might be tested by actual materials. Everyone says, I want that success. There's a lot of depressed rich people in the world. Or you might be tested by, it might be illness, it might be suffering, it might be the betrayal of a loved one, but something in your life is going to press you. It might be national upheavals on race or medicine or whatever it is. And in that moment, like you'll find, you will discover it. There's this moment in my life where I said, oh, I actually believe this stuff. Not that it's useful, not just what my mama said, but it's actually useful to me. And I hope that everybody kind of arrives to that place of clarity as to who they really are.
Absolutely. Kind of along those lines, you say it's both the joy and the suffering that make me who I am. So with that as the backdrop, how do you live by that now? Like, do you see when you see suffering on the horizon, do you run, or do you feel like a little more conditioned, especially after writing something like what you just wrote, to see to embrace it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna have to use another Bible story. Can I do that?
Please do. Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
I've been talking about this a lot the last couple of days, thinking about it the last couple of weeks. You know the story of Joseph? Joseph's the one who's sold by his brothers, and he ends up in kind of slavery. Then they come to him at the very end of his life, and Joseph said, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good," which is great, right? We don't actually. One of the interesting things that we don't see, for most of Joseph's life, we never see him wrestle internally with that kind of suffering, right? Like he says one time, when he's in prison, he goes like, "Don't forget about me." He tells someone, "Hey, help me out if you ever get a chance." But for most of his life, Joseph just lives. And I wonder if, like, the first couple of years, Joseph thought, maybe I'll go back home to my family. But at what point in Joseph's life did he decide or realize, oh, I'm never going home? And the life that I thought might be mine just isn't the life that God has called me to live. And I wonder if he was ever angry at his family for them being the cause of so much suffering. I wonder if he was ever angry at God for God allowing these things to happen. We don't see any of that wrestling. But I'm confident if Joseph was a human being, that's actually what happened. And what happened to the promised land is someone who actually does let the reader into that season of wrestling. But when Joseph gets to the end of his life, he doesn't say that like that stuff is less evil. He doesn't say it. He doesn't say like, hey man, don't worry about it. It wasn't even that deep. He says that somehow God was there in the midst of all of it. And I think that was his settled conclusion. Even though he never goes home, like that entire life that he imagined for himself when he was a kid never occurs. He never grows up with his family and like has the childhood, you know, it's gone forever. And so I think that we might go through things, and we might go through a long season where we're trying to figure out like what any of it means, whether or not God is in the midst of any of it. And we might say, I don't even see the plot of my life, right? But hopefully we arrive at the end where we can say, oh, God is in control of this narrative, and he will see it through to its proper conclusion. So that no matter what's around the corner, whatever is around that corner, God is going to be there to meet me. And so for me, that's what I say. I don't expect suffering, and I don't expect joy. I expect like whatever it is that is around the corner, me and God are going to face it together. Now, what do I think is going to happen in the church? And do I think suffering is on the way?
So like what's one measurable what's like one measurable hope you would have for 2024? Like, is there something that like when 2024 comes and goes, with these conversations within the church, even like what would be your hope ideally?
Man, I hope that in 2024 I'm walking with the Lord.
Okay.
I guess when I say about that, and this is true, this is the truth. We can't control outcomes. Yeah, we can only bear faithful witness.
Yeah.
And one of the things that when I was young, I'm 43, so maybe I still count as young. I turned 44 in a couple of weeks. I just thought we could fix it, right? We can fix it.
Yeah.
And the more you begin to realize racism is a sin, and it's a sin like any other sin, like greed. We can fight greed, but the ultimate victory over greed is eschatological. And so I want to say, I hope in 2024 that God keeps raising up faithful witnesses who will continue to stir the hearts and consciences of people. One of the reasons, maybe I can put it this way, this might bring it all the way back around to David. One of the reasons why I remain hopeful for the church is like, I guess it's almost like if God was a coach, I'd say he's like a really good coach. And what I mean by that is like, he puts people together that nobody would expect. So, you know, I'm a football player, a really good offensive coordinator. Oh man, how do you scheme to get that guy wide open? That's amazing, right? And so if I'm like on the other side of God's team, like, and I just don't see like one day this kid who I taught in like high school starting a podcast, right? All racially speaking. And like, I go off and write this book about, you know, reading my Black and I walk to the promised land. Nobody who was sitting in that classroom foresaw those two events, not even me and you, right? We know we'd have this conversation together, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
So like, nobody was battling against me and you. Like, Saint's not like, oh man, I got to get David Phipps and Esau McCaulley and keep them being friends, right? Nobody's thinking about that. And so, but once we're here together, it's too late now. Now we're buddies, right? And so I just think the ways in which God is continually raising up people from unexpected places, giving unexpected connections, gives me hope. So I don't have any hope in the ability of like the players, but I really, really trust the coach.
That's good.
That's great. That's really good. Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
That's great.
John Mark, do you have any? I want to honor Dr. McCaulley's time, but anything? I mean, we have like a billion more things we had written down.
And I mean, there's so much more to ask you. I just want to say how much I've appreciated first reading While Black. I felt seen when I read that. I felt like I wasn't alone. I grew up predominantly white Christian spaces. So reading While Black helped me see that there are things that I value in scripture that other people value too, the cultural things. So it was hugely impactful in my life. I read it twice on my own for myself. And then I was a part of a book study with Black men and women, which was really neat. And at the same time, I was leading a book study with predominantly white people from the boomer generation. So it was an awesome experience. So thank you for writing that book.
Oh, thank you. This is what I want you to do. I want you to get all of those people together and do a book study on How Far to the Promised Land. And tell me,
Okay.
I would love to hear a conversation between groups that have done both.
All right.
Oh yeah.
All right. I'll do it.
So
Yeah, make a note.
I think that would be really cool. But thank you. That's a real
Yeah.
honor.
Yep. Yeah. So
And
thank you for writing the book. It was great.
I wrote the book because, like I said, there's a lot of people who I thought might have shared those values.
Mhm.
I said, well, let me write a book and see.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of people say, yeah, we share them. Gives me
Did
a
you
lot.
find us? Yeah. So we're in ministry, and I work in diversity and helping our white evangelical organization grow and caring for people across cultures. And I was asked early on, right around when you were writing the book, before the book came out, for any resources for Black Christians, and I didn't have an answer. It was like right at my beginning of growing and learning. And now I have a bunch, but top on that list whenever I get asked is Reading While Black. So
Oh, thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
Appreciate
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll end with this because at the beginning before we hit record, you were talking about how we I don't know, I guess lost touch. You kind of threw me under the bus for not reaching out to you sooner. But in all seriousness, I found I think it was probably around 2020 when you talked about or when Reading While Black came out and you were becoming more of a public figure. I saw like friends retweeting you, and mostly what I saw was like quotes and Esau McCaulley, and I saw your picture, and I was like, wait, what? And so I started looking up. I texted Daniel Miller, shout out, former student, still my best friend to this day.
Hey,
I was
Daniel.
like, yeah, and I was like, wait, did you know that
Hey,
he was
Christy.
an author? Yeah, did you know he was an author? No,
They got
he's
kids too. Wait, they got a couple of kids. How many kids they got?
they got 5.
5. That's enough.
5.
I'm just playing.
Yeah.
That's enough.
I'm just playing. You do you, Millers.
They're doing great. They're down in OKC, leading worship.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But anyway, that's how I came. I had people, and I started having people refer, referencing the book, and I'm like, man, small world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you waited 3 years before you.
I was just gonna say I'm probably making myself look even
I'm
worse.
about to say, and 3 years later, I sent you an email. That's
Yeah.
a weird story, man.
Yeah,
There's a story.
I gotta be real on here. The listeners can pick up on inauthenticity,
Hey, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It was good to meet you. It was good to see one of my former students. I know there's a bunch of other listeners, but shout out to anybody else from Norfolk Christian. God bless y'all. And thank you. Like I said, thank you for reading. Thank you for reading my Black, and thank you for reading How Far to the Promised Land. And you guys did a great job. It was a joy to be on your podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Listeners, everybody, please check out How Far the Promised Land, Reading While Black, and anything Dr. McCaulley puts out. We cannot recommend any of them more highly. Thank you guys for listening. Music you're listening to is done by a guy, Dylan Dent. Our artwork is created by Ashley Bush. We'll see you guys next time.
Right.